love to see it.
That's Patrick Christie's Tonight, weeknights from 9 p.m. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, good evening. It's me, Jacob Rees-Mogg, on State of the Nation tonight. Scientists have warned it's virtually certain that 2024 will be the hottest year since global temperature records began in the 19th century. But we've come this far and things seem fine, so surely it's time to let the costly net zero agenda go for good. The debate over marriage between first cousins has been opened by the former Tory party chairman, Richard Holden. He has tabled a motion to ban the practice, but is multiculturalism to blame? Red Rachel, the Chancellor, goes grovelling to Brussels. Can a stagnating economic organisation give her lessons in failure? Plus, I'll be joined by Monsignor Nazir Ali to discuss the Syrian Christian groups facing persecution by the rebels that have now taken over the country. State of the Nation starts now. I'll also be joined by my formidable panel, Telegraph columnist Tim Stanley and the former Labour MP Lloyd Russell-Moyle. As ever, it's a crucial part of the programme. Let me know your views, mailmog@gbnews.com. But now it's your favourite time of the day, the News Bulletin with Sophia Wensler.
Jacob, thank you. Good evening. It's just gone 8 o'clock. These are your headlines. The Prime Minister has said Britain and its allies must be intensely focused on the transition to a new regime in Syria amid fears of resurgence of Islamic State. It comes as the UK has paused all Syrian asylum claims. It follows France, Germany and Austria saying they would pause decisions on asylum requests from Syrian citizens until the political situation in the Middle Eastern country became clearer. Speaking a while ago, Home Secretary Yvette Cooper confirmed the UK would be assessing the situation.
That the situation in Syria is moving extremely fast after the fall of the Assad regime. We have seen some people returning to Syria, but we also have a very fast-moving situation that we need to closely monitor. And that is why, like Germany, like France and like other countries, we have paused asylum decisions on cases from Syria while the Home Office reviews and monitors the current situation.
Meanwhile, Sir Keir Starmer is facing criticism for putting efforts to kickstart economic growth above human rights concerns as he meets Saudi Arabia's Crown Prince, Mohammed bin Salman. Downing Street said the economy was Sir Keir's #1 priority, but insists he would still raise concerns about the Saudi government's human rights record. Campaigners are urging the Prime Minister to speak out on the cases of child defendants facing the death penalty and the murder of journalist Jamal Khashoggi. In other news, Edinburgh City Council leader Cammy Day has resigned from his post following reports he sent Ukrainian refugees messages asking about their sexual preferences. The Labour politician had already been suspended by his party as police investigate a complaint against him of inappropriate behaviour. The Sunday Mail reported he sent unsolicited messages to Ukrainian refugees who said they felt unable to rebuff him. US media is reporting that a man is being questioned in connection with the fatal shooting of a US healthcare CEO in what's believed to have been a targeted assassination. 26-year-old Luigi Mangione is being detained over the fatal shooting of United Healthcare Chief Executive Brian Thompson. Speaking moments ago, the New York City Police Commissioner Jessica Tisch gave an update on the situation. And Donald Trump has said the king is fighting very hard as the monarch continues to receive cancer treatment. It comes after the US president-elect met with the Prince of Wales in Paris following the ceremonial reopening of Notre Dame Cathedral on Saturday. Mr. Trump told the New York Post that the pair discussed Charles and the Princess of Wales's health, with both being diagnosed with cancer this year. Mr. Trump revealed Princess Kate is doing well and the king is fighting very hard, adding that William loves his father and he loves his wife, so it was sad. Those are the latest GB News headlines. More in an hour.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Welcome back to State of the Nation. Official forecasts for the European Commission claim it is probable that 2024 will be the hottest year on record. One of the directors from the body that issued the figures suggested they mean ambitious climate change action is more urgent than ever. So there you have it. Apparently the only problem with the green agenda is that we haven't been radical enough. Apparently being reliant on unreliable wind and solar energy, making energy more expensive for consumers and businesses, isn't sufficiently radical. Banning new oil and gas licences in the North Sea, putting thousands of jobs at risk, as well as our energy security, isn't radical enough. Prohibiting new petrol and diesel cars by 2030, or putting quotas on car manufacturers at great cost to jobs and increased prices for consumers, isn't radical enough either. Not to mention having electricity prices for industry that are 4 times those of the United States. But if this is the hottest year on record, according to the climate change lobby, shouldn't things be a lot worse than in fact they are? Remember the endless documentaries designed to make viewers feel guilty about polar bears? Well, polar bear numbers, if you're concerned about this, almost tripled since the 1960s, according to the Global Warming Policy Foundation. And what about hurricanes? Surely hurricanes are getting worse, aren't they? Well, up to a point, Lord Copper. The best data available for hurricanes is from the US, and they show the frequency of hurricanes making landfall in the continental United States has declined slightly since 1900. It's often claimed hurricanes are getting stronger, but the frequency of Category 3 and above hurricanes making landfall since 1900 is also on a modestly downward trend. So what about all those terrible forest fires? Remember the fires in Greece last year? Surely climate change is to blame. Well, according to both the Royal Society and NASA, the total global area burnt by wildfires every year has been in decline for 25 years. The list of propaganda goes on, whether it's The Guardian writing an obituary for the Great Barrier Reef or the Evening Standard issuing front pages suggesting doom and gloom. We have now hit the hottest year on record, and yet real hindrance to our economy is not extreme weather, wildfires or declining polar bear populations, but the net zero agenda, the agenda that is making you cold and poor. It's time to abandon it. As ever, let me know your views via mailmog@gbnews.com. I have today a mighty panel of experts, the 3rd Viscount Monckton of Brenchley, Liam Kavanagh, cognitive and social scientist and the co-founder of Climate Majority Project, and Sarah Lunnan, the Just Stop Oil spokesman. Well, Sarah, I'll give you the first go because I've had my say. We were warned that the world would pretty much be ending if we got to 2.7 degrees increase in temperature under Paris. We've got there and we're all still alive.
Actually, we're about 1.61 degrees, not 2.7.
Well, I was getting Fahrenheit rather than centigrade.
Well,
I was using proper English measures rather than getting continental on my viewers.
But, Jacob, since you've got your bit written down, I wrote a little bit down here so that I got mine right. And this is from something called Climate Scorpion. It's called The Stingers in the Tail. And it's written by that bunch of eco-activists, the Institute and Faculty of Actuaries. That's the grey men in suits who determine how much profit they can make from how long you're likely to live. They're not renowned for their extremism or their activism. And they basically are telling us that we are not being lucky at the moment. We've got an 18% chance of temperatures reaching 4 or 5 degrees by the end of the century. That's worse chances than playing Russian roulette. And we're being asked to play it with everything we love and everything we cherish. You've had quite a long intro, so if you'll let me finish.
We want your questions as well.
So what's going to happen to us is we are going to lose farming, we're going to lose our transport infrastructure, we are going to make the world uninhabitable for billions of people where they currently live. It's not going to happen all at once.
There's no evidence for that, actually, is there? That's just the alarmist
statement. There's quite a lot of evidence. So you can deny it if you want to, which I imagine which is what Lord Monckton is going to do, a dinosaur from the House of Lords.
He's not actually in the House of Lords.
And Lord Monckton, you are actually...
You are an hereditary, but you're not in the House.
That's right. No, my father was flung out along with
even more of a dinosaur.
So it's nice to get our facts
but you are basically betraying this country. You're betraying our landscapes.
Okay.
You're betraying the British values.
That's all very interesting. That's not facts. Why don't we try and have
some facts? It is absolutely
fact. Let me bring you in, Liam, because We were warned that terrible things were going to happen. Al Gore told us.
If you live in Tenbury at the moment, terrible things are happening. They have flooded 7 times in 4 years.
I mean, I can maybe just to interject that, of course, the whole warning, right, was about a tipping point, right? So the idea was that we were safe until we got to 1.5, and then all of the trouble starts after that, right? It shouldn't be called climate change, it should be called climate chaos, and the point at which the chaos really starts is 1.5. So the fact that things up till now are somehow tolerable doesn't really contradict the scientific consensus at all.
Right, but every time there is a forest fire or a hurricane, people come onto this programme and tell me that it's the fault of climate change. They're basically making it up.
No, there are models. So if you can look, in the scientific community has created models recently to figure out, what is and is not, and make some type of guess at what might be due to climate change. But to counter some of your opening statistic, for example, the most severe hurricanes have gotten more severe. The biggest wildfires have gotten larger, and part of the reason why there's less forest fires is because there's simply less forest. Right?
It was 40 degrees 2 years ago in this country
Than there was 50 years ago, right?
But that's from the Royal Society of pretty respectable bodies that have come up with these figures.
Yeah, there's nothing wrong with the figures, but the question is why are they? Why are they?
Why was it 40 degrees 2 years ago? Hello. It was 40 degrees 2 years ago.
Yeah.
The fire brigade had the busiest day since World War II.
It was quite hot in 1976.
No, it was much hotter. 40
well,
degrees.
Let's bring Christopher in.
We've never hit 40 degrees before.
Yes, well, I've published some 24 scientific papers in peer-reviewed journals on the climate question.
You're a liar.
And I can send you the list afterwards, and I'll send you the list afterwards so
You're
you
lying.
can make it available. Moncton@mail.com.
You're
if
lying.
anyone would like
You're a liar.
to receive a list of the papers. Now, if we can have less shouting
Still
and more
lying.
fact.
Sorry, you don't get us anywhere just by being abusive.
The facts are these, that
Lies.
though the population
You're lying.
of the world has increased fourfold in the last 100 years, the number of people every year, annually averaged, dying from any form of extreme weather has fallen by 99%. So no, we're not suffering. Likewise, even if you've got to ask the right question in policy terms, which is not how much warming may we cause, but how much warming that we might cause.
2 million people had no electricity this weekend.
How much
2
warming
million.
that we might... Well, yes, because if you take off all the copper power stations and put wind and solar, then it's not going to work very well.
I don't think it was anything to do with wind and solar.
If I may just get a little word in edgeways, the truth of it is that the right question in policy terms is how much warming that might otherwise occur we could prevent, even if the whole world, rather than just the West, went in a straight line from here to net zero by the UN's target date of 2050. And the answer is that would reduce global temperature by 2050 by 0.1 Celsius degrees at a cost of $2 quadrillion, which is approximately 20 years global GDP.
So you can let you.
That's the problem.
At
that point, I have to interject. There's no basis at all.
All right, but let's bring you in on
and
this.
And again, at moncton@mail.com, I will send you a one-page sheet that will prove those calculations with all the sources.
Right,
but probably not echoed by the rest of the scientific community.
But Christopher makes the interesting point that it is the West who are doing it, but the US now is not going to do it. Donald Trump. The UK has 1% of emissions. We can make ourselves cold and poor, even if all this is right.
If you're in a lifeboat and it's sinking, you don't refuse to bail out because you're just 1%, do you?
For me, the question here for the UK has to be, do you?
I don't have to. I'm little. There's no point me bailing. I'm just 1% of the activity. We're in a lifeboat. We are in a lifeboat and we are sinking, and you're saying, hey, it's just 1%. No, there's a question of morality and integrity.
Someone has to lead a climate coalition, right?
Why? Because that makes
look at it this way. There's only 130 countries in the world. If you want to get something done, you want to have a public good. Actually, there are 200.
180,
sorry. 130 that of real consequence. We can say.
Well, you're ignoring the Vatican.
Well, in terms of the Vatican and lots of other, and sort of.
that have geopolitical, and Great Britain is a thought leader, right? If Great Britain actually does something, it can bring along a lot of other people in Europe. And if Europe does something, it can bring along a lot of the rest of the world. You can get a lot of the world's largest economies behind you if you move.
But not if the US is doing the precise opposite.
Yeah, but this is what
China is doing the precise opposite.
Yeah, and this is what, so someone needs to lead.
Russia is doing the precise opposite. India is doing the precise opposite.
And if nobody leads, Jacob, in the long term, we're sacrificing long-term economic disaster, because the reality is that AMOC, you've heard recently that AMOC is starting to shut down. What are the economic consequences of that for Britain?
Atlantic Meridional Overturning Circulation,
honestly,
which, as Professor Carl Wunsch has repeatedly said, while the world spins and the wind blows, that circulation must continue.
You can just look up, Google search at home about this, see if people agree. So the Atlantic currents that warm Britain.
Your side of the argument needs to get control of the people who, whenever the wind blows, say that this is a consequence of global warming. Whenever there's a flood, it's a consequence of global warming. Because like the boy who called wolf, people are no longer believing this. And you're saying to politicians
because of people like
they must make
Jacob,
their electorates cold and poor for something that may happen in 50 years' time. That is not anything any sensible politician is going to stand for.
If you talk to the people in Tenbury, they are cold and poor.
I'm going to give Liam the last word. I'm going to give the opposite side of the argument last word.
People are already cold and poor.
You've had so many words.
We risk losing everything.
What is inflation not been in
Go to campaign outside the Chinese embassy. That's the one where the emissions are coming from.
Chaos. We're not going to allow Liam the last word, I'm sorry to say, because Sarah has stolen them all. After the break, cousin marriage is apparently a growing problem. Should it be banned?
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, and this is GB News, Britain's news channel.
GB News Breakfast, every day from 6 a.m.
Well, unfortunately not. We're seeing a lot of, as you mentioned, delayed treatment, non-treatment. And I think that you have to remember that it takes 5 years to train a dentist, right? To get them through college and then into the VT training. So unfortunately, none of this can be done overnight. And we are seeing a lot of long-term issues. Like Eamon mentioned, his mother hadn't seen the dentist in a number of years and then needed a number of teeth taken out. And so we're seeing people not go for treatment early enough and then leading to more extensive treatments like root canals and extractions that are more severe but also more costly.
Mm-hmm. But Vanessa, I always look at this and think, why is there a problem? My view is, surely the state should sponsor anyone who wants to be a dentist and pay for their training in return for that person signing up to work for the NHS for a number of years, 8 years, 10 years, whatever, then they can do what they want. Why don't we have a system like that?
Well, that would be an excellent solution and definitely something that we could look at in the long term. I think that when you think about people who are going into dentistry, you know, I know a lot of my colleagues and stuff went to Australia to travel and to explore straight after college as well.
And avoid paying back the debt.
Yeah, and we're, you know, the rising population, I suppose we're probably just not producing as many dentists to target and to treat us as a nation efficiently.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Join me, Nana Okwir, for an informative, interactive news programme with a difference. It's fun.
No, he didn't say that, Dave.
I'm so surprised.
I think there's an element of truth to that.
Join me from 3 p.m. every weekend, only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Christopher Hope. From pop stars to politicians, I'll interview anybody in a pub who's got a political opinion. Join me every Friday on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube or gbnews.com, or wherever you get your podcasts. This is GB News, the People's Channel.
Weekdays on GB News. Wake up to breakfast every day from 6 a.m. Followed by Britain's newsroom at 9:30. At noon, it's Good Afternoon Britain. Followed by Martin Daubney from 3 p.m. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. I'm still Jacob Rees-Mogg, and we, I suppose, arguably were discussing climate change. I think we might have had more of a series of monologues, but nonetheless, your views have come in. Alan says, if this were the hottest year on record, no one told us. In the northwest, winter is our top priority, not climate change. And Neil says, Jacob, I'm puzzled. We have been cutting our emissions and fuel use through innovation every year for the last 50-plus years, yet the planet is still heating up. How can that be? That is a very good question, and it's a pity Lord Monckton isn't here, because I'm sure he could answer it. Grounds of consanguinity were a convenient reason for medieval monarchs to have their marriages annulled by the church. Eleanor of Aquitaine, a really great lady actually, had her marriage to Louis VII of France annulled on the grounds of consanguinity. They were third cousins once removed. She then married King Henry II, who was merely her third cousin. But there was no clerical objection, as cousin marriages were not entirely outlawed. Former Tory chairman Richard Holden has tabled a motion in Parliament to ban marriages between first cousins. Though the practice is infrequent in this country, it occasionally happens and is legal. Interestingly, the 2007 to 2011 Born in Bradford report found that 60% of couples of Pakistani heritage were related by blood, with 37% being first cousins. Cousin marriage can cause birth defects and harm a child's chances in life. Well, now, to discuss this tricky issue, I'm joined by my formidable panel, Telegraph columnist Tim Stanley and the former Labour MP Lloyd Russell-Moyle. Tim, is this something where the state needs to intervene, or is it actually something that is best guided by social norms, that cousin marriage is not usual but isn't illegal?
Well, some reportage suggests that it is on the decline among those communities. And there's also a case for saying we have a habit nowadays of banning anything. Whenever there's any kind of social problem, we treat it as if it were the cause, not the symptom, and we step in and try and ban it. Whereas what might be the real issue might be cultural difference and immigration. I'll take your Eleanor Aquitaine and raise Rudy Giuliani, who annulled his first marriage because she was his second cousin. So this is something which does happen. And in our church, the Catholic Church is historically strongly opposed to first cousin marriages. As a general rule, they're not allowed in the church. They can be permitted with the bishop's special dispensation. And it is argued that one of the reasons why the West is as it is because the Catholic Church went to war on cousin marriage, which meant that rather than people growing up in tight-knit families that stuck together like a tribal network, they instead married out and began to see themselves more as individuals. What then happens when you begin to welcome into the country large numbers of people from a far more tribal kind of culture, where people have very tight kinship networks and they don't wish to do that? So that's the real issue. If you were to try to ban it, my question is, how do you police it? How do you stop people just not marrying but living together and having children? How do you stop people going abroad and having children? It might be, as I say, that this is a conversation about a symptom when really we should be raising questions about what kind of cultures are being imported into Britain.
And actually, the Aquitaine point is quite a good one, because although it wasn't allowed, it was possible, and therefore there was some effort to police it so that it didn't become completely routine. But it wasn't impossible under certain circumstances. And that degree of flexibility is probably better than an outright ban.
And I think it depends what you're trying to ban. Are you trying to ban cousins living together, cohabiting in illegal matrimony, or are you really trying to ban the small pool of DNA that gets passed on and the problems in terms of birth defects that follow? In that case, you should actually not be looking at a marriage ban, but a sex ban. And we do ban sex in this country. You can't have sex with your uncle or with your niece or nephew or with parents, even half-sisters, and even adopted and step-parents you can't, because we believe that it is dangerous biologically, but also because of power relationships. Now, if we genuinely believe that there are power relationships problems, then it's a sex issue, not a marriage issue, I would put it. And if it's a marriage issue, then I don't quite understand what we're trying to do here. The Bradford study is very interesting. If you look at the latest update of the Bradford study, out of the young people in the cohort, only 6% report that they are married or are betrothed to cousins, first or second cousins. And so I think it is a case of, as people come and live in Britain, as people are educated, particularly at university level, those kinds of things become socially unpleasant. And I'm not sure you need to legislate for things that you can make socially unpleasant and then allow the few exceptions where, for example, they didn't know. Why make it illegal if you didn't know that that was your first cousin, and that does sometimes happen.
And is it also possible that we're slightly being mealy-mouthed about this and we're more concerned about forced marriage?
Yes.
And that actually cousin marriages are much more likely to be at least strongly encouraged because it's all about keeping families together, keeping money together, inheritances, and so on.
Yes. And picking up on your point about generational change, I suspect, I don't know this, but I would suspect that the incidence of the marriages being forced is probably higher among people who are relatively recent arrivals to the community who haven't integrated yet. And therefore they are cut off from other people. There might be language barriers as well as cultural barriers. So it is easier for someone to carry on that pattern of living. But then someone who's been here a longer time, integrated into state schools and things like that, one can imagine that it's much harder to carry on. But Lloyd's absolutely right. The real issue is the power imbalance. It's the compulsion of someone to do something. As regards to, I mean, the one thing we haven't really mentioned is a sort of moral outrage at the concept of first cousin marriages. That's gone because we've changed our mind about marriage. Marriage is no longer, I mean, I still see marriage as something which is defined by the church and regulated by my church, but most people do not. Most people see marriage as a part of a relationship, a solemnization of it, or a good party. So the idea that we would get very uptight about certain kinds of marriages which are consensual and don't lead to physical harm, maybe first cousin marriage does, I don't know, but the idea that we get uptight about that, I think is quite strange in this modern society. Why do people care?
There are other things that we can do to stop forced marriage or coercion in marriage, particularly calling off periods. You can make sure people need to get married in the UK, so you don't recognise marriages from countries where you're concerned that that might be a problem. And we do that with certain countries. We say, no, you have to get remarried here for us to recognise it. Those things are better bulwarks and decent education that enlightens people so that they realise that there is an escape in a way. I mean, when I was worked at Bradford University, and we did deal with occasional forced marriages, but the best way was to allow those, often women, to come to us, and we supported them rather than trying to make it illegal and then drive it underground.
And why would they try and make it illegal? Why have the Tories raised this? They've done so because, like banning the burqa, it's part of a suite of measures that's designed to make life as uncomfortable for conservative Muslims in the country as possible, to discourage them either not to come or to leave.
Whereas actually the Conservatives believe in freedom and we shouldn't be interfering in these ways.
No.
And it is hard to think of how people got married in rural areas in centuries gone past when they were all related to each other within the village, and that is basically what is carrying on.
You're speaking as an ex-Somerset MP.
Oh, of course I am, yes. Remote Somerset villages, they had to marry each other, inevitably.
Yeah.
And they blamed any problems on lead poisoning from the Mendips. Anyway, enough of that, and thank you to my panel. In a moment, the economy has been forced into intensive care under the Socialists, with growth promises nowhere near fruition. Labour is failing voters.
Evening. Welcome to your latest weather update from the Met Office here on GB News. Clear skies overnight across the north will allow things to turn very frosty. Also some thick fog patches for parts of Scotland and Northern Ireland. Further south, staying largely dry but quite cloudy. This weather front still generating quite a few showers across the far southeast, parts of Essex, even as far north as Suffolk. Those showers feeding in across Kent, the London area, into parts of Hampshire and the Isle of Wight. But away from the southeast, it is generally dry. Clearer skies here. That's where the fog is going to thicken up. Southwest Scotland, also western parts of Northern Ireland. That fog likely to be pretty dense and linger well into tomorrow. For England and Wales, we'll keep a lot of cloud. That'll keep the temperatures generally above freezing. But a wet start for parts of the southeast. Still a few showers coming in, particularly across parts of Kent, feeding all the way down across the Channel Islands too. But elsewhere, generally dry and cloudy for England and Wales. Some frost across Cumbria and certainly further north and west across Scotland and Northern Ireland. The frost widespread and some dense patches of fog. Parts of the central belt, particularly to the west, southwest Scotland and parts of Northern Ireland. And where that fog forms through the night, it could be very slow to clear tomorrow. Quite a lot of cloud across the far north. Some drizzly rain heading its way towards Shetland. The showers in the southeast, well, still a few feeding in, but tending to fizzle out generally through the day. Some breaks in the cloud for North Wales, northwest England. Bit of sunshine possible here. Temperatures 6 or 7 Celsius. Still still feeling cold with that wind coming in from the North Sea across the southeast. That's still there on Wednesday, as is the possibility of the odd shower across the south. Fog again for parts of southern Scotland and Northern Ireland, and again it could last all day. If it does, temperatures will struggle to get above freezing, but away from the fog, much of Scotland, Northern Ireland having another sunny day on Wednesday. Most of England and Wales staying fairly cloudy. Bye for now.
Good Afternoon Britain isn't just about us. The wonderful thing about this programme is it's about everyone watching. It's an interactive programme.
Well, there absolutely is something to see here, and we're going to be talking about it more. Whether it's breaking royal news, Will, please bring us up to date, or indeed a particularly punchy speech in the House of Commons.
Very, very curious.
We bring it to you live, and then we bring you live reaction as well.
That's Good Afternoon Britain, weekdays from midday.
Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Why go out on a Friday night when Friday night comes straight to your home?
Talking about?
Join me and my A-team of top pundits. Chemistry tonight is electric. As we tackle the big stories of the day with wit, insight and fearless energy.
Man of the people.
It's all vibe.
Just a filing cabinet on wheels with a tie on.
So, order in Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, every Friday at 8, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. We were discussing the tables of consanguinity, or discussing cousin marriage. And Julie says, even if you stop them from marrying, what stops them from being together? Which is a very good point. And Ben says, Jacob, do you think it's wise to be letting people in from other countries where there is a high rate of inbreeding? Well, very good and fair questions to be asking. So, less than 6 months since its victory, Labour's economic promises have evaporated. The budget struck uncertainty into businesses with a draft of punitive measures that have undermined growth. A BDO report demonstrates that Rachel Reeves truly has crashed the economy as business activity dropped 3.2 points to 94.7 last month, the lowest figure in over a year, pushing Britain to the brink of recession. Comes after third quarter GDP growth was no more than a stagnant 0.1%. In Brussels today, Red Rachel is praising the crisis-ridden EU, while at home pledges on growth have been jilted by a lack of serious government policy. The letters may have outlived Liz Truss, but its relative vegetative growth has surely surpassed that of Labour's economy so far. Well, I'm joined now by Philip Ullman, social business entrepreneur and Tory donor, as well as my panel, Telegraph columnist Tim Stanley and the former Labour MP Lloyd Russell-Moyle. Philip, this is the worst attack on business by a government since the early days of Harold Wilson, isn't it?
Yeah, it is a serious attack. The increase in national insurance increases the cost of employment fundamentally, and it increases the size of the state. So fundamentally, I think there's a lack of any kind of vision. I have no idea what they're trying to do. I don't think there's clarity there. And what I did personally, I'm a social entrepreneur, so I built up a business to a turnover of $1 billion, employing 100,000 people. And most of those were minimum wage workers. And I listened to them. And I think the kind of elephant in the room is these people are struggling to put food on the table. The cost of living, we say inflation's under control. It's not under control. They've got massive increase in costs, 20-25%. They can't afford to buy houses and homes, and therefore that is the real problem. Now, if you increase national insurance and increase the minimum wage, and you're a profit maximising company, you're going to have to either actually make redundancies, because you're going to make ends meet. And therefore, this is going to reduce, fundamentally, it's not increase employment, it's going to reduce employment. And also, it's going to reduce wages, because if the NI, national insurance, is increased, and you're trying to maximise your profits, the next time the wage comes for an increase, you're not going to increase it. So fundamentally, I think there's a lack of any kind of real vision. I'm not blaming Rachel, but I just think there is no vision.
And real wages have to fall if you put up taxes on business, because they need to find the money from somewhere, and prices have to go up. But that's a nominal change, that the real value of money declines.
Absolutely. So to me, I've given a lot of thought to what needs to be done. I think we're at a stage where we need to rethink the very fundamentals of how we operate the economy.
I don't disagree with you, and that's why it's so odd for Rachel Reeves to go off to Europe, because France has the same problem,
Yes.
Germany has the same problem. None of the major engines of economic growth in Europe, as were in the past, is firing properly.
Agreed.
So going to seek their advice seems precisely the wrong place to be going. You want to be going off to see Donald Trump, who might have a few ideas, or Mr. Milei in Argentina.
Look, my views are more radical than that. I think that we need to revisit what the purpose of business is. Fundamentally, businesses which distribute responsibility are much better at organising things than the state is. But the trouble at the moment is the businesses are allowed to make as much profit as they want. And that, to me, is fundamentally problematic because we're seeing cost of living increases, we're seeing banks charging high interest rates. So fundamentally, we need to revisit that assumption. And I think the only way of actually starting to sort the problem out is to actually look at what the purpose of business is. And we need to align. So to me, the state should be aligned with business. If business had a social purpose, a purpose of looking after people, creating meaningful employment, creating jobs that pay enough to put food on the table, to have clothes, to build families, to build communities. And suddenly you're aligned, and that's not what we do.
And that's a more paternalistic, even Victorian model of business, with business looking after the individuals in as complete a sense as they can. Do you think that is an attractive way of remodelling business?
Well, I was a Labour and Cooperative MP, and I believe not that the state has all the solutions, but that we should make it easier for mutuals to exist. The destruction of the mutual sector in the financial industries has been, in long term, a disaster, because it has not allowed people to trust that your financial institution is working for your best interest. Instead, they're now working for someone else's best interest. The same, I think, in a lot of business. It's not either business or the state, but actually organising business. And my view is that, and this is what Labour have pledged to do, and I do think that we've got to give some time to get this through, but to double the size of the cooperative sector in this next Parliament, which includes providing tax incentives for it. If you are a business that's making a profit and you are not having a social purpose, then you should pay, in my view, full corporation tax. If you are a business that, of course, is with social profit, then actually you should have a reduced corporation tax. You can do it via tax measures, can suddenly change the way that our economy works for people, because there's two problems. There's economic growth overall, which is sluggish, but I think that you are being far too negative. Let's see what it is in the long term. And there is also the distribution of that wealth within the populations. And at the moment, the distribution is problematic. And I don't mean just distribution of wages. I mean distribution of how those resources are spent and utilised within the economy. And at the moment, it is poorly distributed, meaning that people can't get on the housing ladder, they can't live well, and therefore they are frustrated.
Tim, there's a point in that, isn't there, that when interest rates were at record low levels for over 10 years, that was extremely helpful to people with assets, but people who hadn't got onto the housing ladder found it harder and harder to get started.
Yes. What I would say is whenever I hear business discussed with Labour, it always turns into an advert for the cooperative society. And that's because Labour has this idea of a good business and bad business. What they don't realise is that all business is good in the sense that it generates wealth and it contributes to society becoming richer and happier and freer. Labour, for instance, looks at supermarkets and says, well, you can afford to pay more. And maybe they can, actually, because they've made very good profits. But supermarkets also provide jobs and do things like stay open during COVID. They do have a social dimension to them. I always want to stress to people, this government is not socialist. It's silly. It's not socialist, right? Socialism is we are going to plan to grow in order to create a more equal society. This is a government which has this very narrow sense of its vision. We've got to balance the books. And once we balance the books, that will create a stability. And business will then go, thank you for balancing the books and creating the stability. And business will go away and do whatever it needs to do. But in order to balance the books, it's taxing the businesses. And it's also taxing the things that make life enjoyable, like sending your children to private schools. It's taxing all the incentives.
Sending your children to private schools is not an enjoyable activity, not for the parents or the children.
Well,
probably.
Education, culture, science, these are things which make life worth living. And the government's taxing those things, which is going to encourage people to move overseas. So this is the problem. The government just looks at business as this thing over here, like a cow, to be milked. Let's just milk it, because it'll do fine.
No, but if you look
they're
at
killing the cow.
If you look at Starmer's new pledges that he's come out with, the quantity quantitative pledges from the manifesto. It's about tripling the number of big infrastructure projects that we have in this country that helps businesses, that injects money into the economy, and that actually makes things better for all. So I actually do think we'll see some of this economic gain later down the line.
We'll bring in our business expert when we start quoting from the Labour Party manifesto. That actually business is usually a force for good, and the taxes and employment it creates. And you were employing 100,000 people. That's giving 100,000 people an opportunity and a start in life.
Yeah, but I'm not talking about either socialism or capitalism. What I'm talking about, because both of them are kind of top-down command and control. Capitalism is top-down command and control by the owners of the company. I had a lot of experience of that working for the big retailers. You can imagine that they told you what to do. Socialism is the state becomes too big and becomes bureaucratic. I mean, we recognise that a big state isn't going to work. No, what I'm talking about is distributing responsibility to small, self-managing teams, a different model which have a social purpose and not about profit. It's about looking after people. Now, you may ask, one minute, if there's no profit, why should people do it? They'll do it because we are social beings.
But is this the Quaker model, as in Cadbury family and the Bourneville village and so on?
It's building on that. But the best example I've come across of this in the world that we live in is Rees-Mogg in Holland, where they completely transformed district nursing, which had become bloated. There were 3 large organisations that were treating their district nurses as things. They were giving them slots, you know. You have 2 minutes to change the dressing. And they're literally dehumanising people. And a guy called Joost de Blok said, no, this is not looking after either the patients, because they had to keep on the specialisation of tasks. You had 10 or 15 different nurses dealing with each patient. So he said, no, this is crazy. Let's start to get small self-managing teams that look to care for the needs of the patient. And the model, and he wasn't for profit, but he completely transformed the whole of district nursing, and it's cost effective as well. So this is the kind of model I'm talking about.
Thank you very much. Well, thank you very much to Philip and to my panel. After the break, after a quarter of a century in charge, President Assad has been toppled. Hopes are high, but will his successors be any better? And what does it mean for the Christian minorities in the region?
This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
The BBC has been branded jaw-achingly stupid, not by me, by the way, over its decision to cast black and ethnic minority actors in the historical drama of Wolf Hall. Now, is this a forward-thinking idea or nonsense? And are we rewriting history? Henry, I mean, the Tudors were real-life people. They were pretty much white.
Well, some of these shows depart so much from historical context anyway that maybe it doesn't make any difference. But I think just generally we've got a problem in this country with portraying history in its correct sense. You can't change history. And I think it's about the motivation. If the motivation is to sort of to some sort of, you know, to make a political point, then I think it's wrong.
What I find kind of tedious about people finding this instant jaw-droppingly stupid, Jesus was portrayed by somebody who's half Slovak and half Irish. Moses was portrayed in the Exodus by an Englishman. So, you know, same with Anne Boleyn, you know, was portrayed by Natalie Portman, who was Jewish. So if this is the one thing that's getting people angry, then there's something deeper within that rage, because I think Hollywood's been doing that, where people...
When you say something deeper, do you think there is a hidden racism and people are complaining about this?
Well, I think for some, maybe yes. I can't speak for everybody because this news dropped today. I don't know why they are thinking that it's egregious, but there absolutely must be some underlying racism if this is the only one that you're upset about.
GB News, the People's Channel.
We're proud to be GB News, the People's Channel, and as you know, we always love to hear your views. Now, there's a new way of getting in touch with us at gbnews.com/yoursay. By commenting, you can be part of a live conversation and join our GB News community. You can even talk to me, Bev Turner, or any of the members of the GB News family.
This is Britain's Newsroom, where your voice matters.
It's just astonishing. With expert analysis and honest opinion, we don't just keep you informed.
We bring you unique perspectives you won't see anywhere else.
Can't argue with any of that. When the news happens, it happens here.
On Britain's Newsroom, weekdays from 9:30am.
Only on GB News.
Nightmare commute? Kick it up a gear with GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+ and on the GB News app. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with GB News Radio. We are the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Well, welcome back. We were talking about Red Rachel trying to destroy the economy, and the mail mogs have come in. Phineas says, surely it's time to scrap the ABR with its paralysing forecasts that don't let the Treasury move an inch to the left or the right. Well, I rather agree with that. It should never have been set up in the first place. At the time, it seemed like a good idea. President Assad was a pathetic yet brutal tyrant who tortured, murdered and gassed his own people. Now he has fallen, and the West rejoices. Yet have we not learnt the lessons of 2003 and the Arab Spring, where the toppling of the brutal Middle Eastern dictatorship sparked more violence and merciless reprisals? Assad, until the civil war, kept a divided country relatively stable, and because as an Alawite he himself came from a minority sect of Islam, he offered some level of protection to Christians, Kurds, Druze and other groups. Now it appears that his successor will be a Sunni Islamist and a former ISIS fighter. Will the replacement of a secular government with a theocratic one bring improvements? Viewers should be reminded of a sobering fact. There were 1.5 million Christians in Iraq in 2003. To the day, there are thought to be just 150,000. Well, I'm joined now by Monsignor Michael Nazir Ali, a distinguished Catholic priest and a former Anglican bishop. Monsignor, thank you very much for coming in.
Oh, thank you for asking me.
One of the problems of the Middle East in recent decades has been that the minority Christian communities have been persecuted and, to some extent, removed.
Well, they certainly are in decline, except there are two exceptions. I think Egypt has, in recent years, lessened the decline. And, of course, in Israel, the Christian community is growing slightly. But with those two exceptions, what you say is correct.
Well, I gave the figures for Iraq, where it's gone down by 90%. And Syria, a theocratic Islamist ruler, is unlikely to be sympathetic to Christians.
It is horrifying. I mean, there are no angels in the political life of the Middle East. There are only monsters, but you've got to decide which is the lesser monster. And if people think Assad was bad...
But Assad was terrible. After the Arab Spring, he gassed his own people, that there were no limits to which he was not prepared to go. And therefore, it's very hard to think that there is worse than Assad, worse than gassing your own people.
Well, the Ba'ath Party has a history of authoritarian, totalitarian, yes, brutal ways of governing, both in Iraq and in Syria. And Assad was, I suppose, a figurehead for all of that. I mean, he wasn't on his own. But what you've now got is the possibility of ISIS resurgence. And I have seen with my own eyes what ISIS did in Iraq with the Christians and the Yazidis and other groups. Jabhat al-Nusra, the immediate predecessor of the present Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, HTS, attacked Christian towns like Malula, where Aramaic is still spoken as their mother tongue, the language of Jesus, destroyed and desecrated churches and altars. I was part of the reconsecration of one of them. They murdered people who refused to convert to their version of Islam. Now, they are saying they've changed. Well, I hope that they have. I pray that they have. But the history is not good, because in Iran, you will remember, at the time of the Iranian Revolution, all sorts of people joined in with the radical Islamists. to remove the Shah, who was also seen as brutal. And once the Shah had been removed, the Islamists came to power and then one by one got rid of all their erstwhile allies. We've seen this happen in Afghanistan recently, where the Taliban gave solemn assurances that they had changed. Well, nothing has changed. They've got worse, in fact. So I think Joe Biden, I don't always agree with Joe Biden, but I thought his statement yesterday was very sensible. He said, yes, we have got rid of Assad, but what is to follow? And the taste of the pudding is in the eating. I have no assurance myself that Syria will remain the kind of plural state that you've just described, and that a theocratic regime will mean the end of a plural Syria with its ancient communities. I mean, going back for Christians to the origins of Christianity, of the Druze, of the Alawites, of the Kurds, and there's so many other groups that it's a patchwork of communities.
And shouldn't the West have learned that actually our getting involved in other nations' affairs doesn't make that other nation better governed? It may lead to a change in government, but it doesn't necessarily make it better. And that in recent decades, the liberal interventionism has been a great disaster. And actually what we tried to do around the Arab Spring made things worse in most of the countries that we got involved in.
Well, it depends on what the intervention is. I mean, the church's intervention, for instance, is in education. It is in healthcare. It is in trying to promote fundamental human freedoms. But if your intervention is simply to manipulate political orders and to bring about regime change, well, there can be short-term change, but that can also often result in chaos.
And that, as you rightly pointed out, the people who come to power, they're quite happy to create a coalition to get to power and promise things.
Yes.
It's not unknown even for Western democracies for people not to do all the things in their manifesto. Once they get into power, then they are in charge, and in a repressive state, they have all the tools of a repressive state to enforce their view.
And in Western democracies, this happens, as you say, but the stakes are not so high, if I may say so. Here you are talking about the survival of ancient communities, of the fundamental freedom to worship, to witness, to live as people choose to. And I just wish I could see this continuing in Syria. At the moment, I can't.
And what can people do to help the Christians in Syria? What are you advocating that Christians watching this programme might do to help them?
Well, of course, I mean, there are basic things. Aid to the church in need. A Catholic charity is helping people with food and clothing and all of those things which will be needed. But I think we should also be promoting some kind of international convention on the future of Syria. This had begun to happen in Geneva some years ago and then lapsed. I think it's time to revive it. There was an internal opposition in Syria. I've met them. There was an external opposition. I've met some of them. There are other groups like the Kurdish groups that need to be involved to see how Syria, first of all, can be stabilized, and then free elections under international aegis can be held. I think if free elections are held, I know a number of areas in Syria reasonably well. I can't see the Syrian people as a whole giving a mandate to the extremists.
Well, Monsignor, thank you very much indeed for coming in this evening. Up next is Patrick Christys. Patrick, what's on your bill of fare this evening?
Yeah, well, I'm taking a bit more of a domestic look, I think, at what's going on in Syria. Two main angles for me on this. Should Syrian refugees now go back home to Syria? The other aspect to it is when you saw people celebrating in the streets, were they celebrating the fall of Assad, or were they celebrating for the installation of a radical Islamist regime? And I think that is quite concerning if it's the latter. First cousin marriage should obviously be banned. I don't think we should be actually afraid of calling out the predominant culture in which that takes place at the moment. And Labour has tried to do this quietly, but we're not letting them get away with it. They've extended the use of migrant hotels for people who've been allowed asylum in Britain. Why? Well, it removes any deterrent there of the potential for homelessness, doesn't it? Labour removing yet another deterrent to coming across the Channel.
Well, that sounds a very exciting programme. As always, that's coming up after the weather. I'll be back tomorrow at 8 o'clock. I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg. This has been State of the Nation, and the weather in Somerset's going to be absolutely beautiful tomorrow. Perfect.
Despite the morning rain, it'll be a nice, warm, cosy day ahead. Boxed heat pumps, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Evening. Welcome to your latest weather update from the Met Office here on GB News. Clear skies overnight across the north will allow things to turn very frosty. Also some thick fog patches for parts of Scotland and Northern Ireland. Further south, staying largely dry but quite cloudy. This weather front still generating quite a few showers across the far southeast, parts of Essex, even as far north as Suffolk. Those showers feeding in across Kent, the London area, into parts of Hampshire and the Isle of Wight. But away from the southeast, it is generally dry. Clearer skies here. That's where the fog is going to thicken up. Southwest Scotland, also western parts of Northern Ireland. That fog likely to be pretty dense and linger well into tomorrow. For England and Wales, we'll keep a lot of cloud. That'll keep the temperatures generally above freezing. But a wet start for parts of the southeast. Still a few showers coming in, particularly across parts of Kent, feeding all the way down across the Channel Islands too. But elsewhere, generally dry and cloudy for England and Wales. Some frost across Cumbria and certainly further north and west across Scotland and Northern Ireland. The frost widespread and some dense patches of fog. Parts of the central belt, particularly to the west, southwest Scotland and parts of Northern Ireland. And where that fog forms through the night, it could be very slow to clear tomorrow. Quite a lot of cloud across the far north. Some drizzly rain heading its way towards Shetland. The showers in the southeast, well, still a few feeding in, but tending to fizzle out generally through the day. Some breaks in the cloud for North Wales, northwest England. Bit of sunshine possible here. Temperatures 6 or 7 Celsius. Still feeling cold with that wind coming in from the North Sea across the southeast. That's still there on Wednesday, as is the possibility of the odd shower across the south. Fog again for parts of southern Scotland and Northern Ireland, and again it could last all day. If it does, temperatures will struggle to get above freezing, but away from the fog, much of Scotland, Northern Ireland having another sunny day on Wednesday. Most of England and Wales staying fairly cloudy. Bye for now.
There will be a light breeze in the morning, leading to a warm front. Boxed heat pumps, sponsors of weather on GB News.
It's our festive treat to you. Your chance to win an incredible £50,000 in tax-free cash. Our biggest ever Great British giveaway. What would you spend £50,000 on in the coming year? Spectacular holidays, a brand new car, home improvements, or maybe you'd just like to save it for a special occasion. For another chance to win, text cash to 63232. One entry costs £2 plus one standard network rate message, or text bonus to 63232. 5 entries cost £5 plus one standard network rate message. Go to gbnews.com/win. Entries start from just £2. You can call 0903 681 3232. Calls cost £2 plus your network access charge, or post your name and number to GB10 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 6 p.m. on the 31st of January. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
It's Patrick Christie's Tonight, and here we do things differently. It's explaining the absolute madness of this, doesn't it? It's explosive. I mean, this is very good. It's lively.
850. Your government sat there, Sean, and it did nothing.
It's controversial. And the Middle East has been in turmoil since before I was born. It's everything you need to kickstart your evening. Everyone's had their Weetabix tonight. I love to see it. That's Patrick Christie's Tonight, weeknights from 9 p.m. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good Afternoon Britain isn't just about us. The wonderful thing about this programme is it's about everyone watching. It's an interactive programme.
Well, there absolutely is something to see here, and we're going to be talking about it more. Whether it's breaking royal news, Will, please bring us up to date, or indeed a particularly punchy speech in the House of Commons.
Very, very curious.
We bring it to you live, and then we bring you live reaction as well.
That's Good Afternoon Britain, weekdays from midday.
Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hi there, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm going to take a second to tell you all about my show, Dubes & Co. We start off with the issues of the day. We then bring in both sides of the arguments. We get rid of the disrespect. And then you throw me into the mix. And trust me, I'll tell it exactly how it is. And then, of course, the magic ingredient, you at home. We mix it all together, and what have we got? In my opinion, the best debate show in town. Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, for a frank and honest discussion with those in power that cuts through the spin and gets to the heart of the issues shaping our nation.
You haven't confirmed that you want to stand as leader, but you haven't ruled it out either.
This report basically says that he's not fit to stand trial. Is he indecisive? Incompetent? I deliver the dose of reality Westminster needs. That's the Camilla Tominey Show at 9:30 every Sunday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
It's 9 p.m. I'm Patrick Christie's. Tonight. Time for Syrian refugees in Britain to have their benefits stopped and to be told to go back home. But the new guy is a radical Islamist, so why are all those people in Britain cheering for a jihadi? And
today, the Prime Minister has announced an additional £11 million of humanitarian support for Syrians.
why has Keir Starmer just given him £11 million to get him kick-started? In other news,